The Whispering Oaks subdivision looked serene on the surface. Wide roads lined with oak and maple trees, sidewalks regularly swept free of debris, houses with perfect lawns and neatly trimmed hedges. Visitors often called the place picturesque, praising the carefully manicured front yards and symmetrical flower beds. Of course, there were typical suburban quarrels, an occasional late-night party, a dog that barked until dawn, or a car engine revving a bit too loudly on a weekend morning. But these minor inconveniences rarely escalated beyond a gentle note on someone's front door. This equilibrium was, in large part, maintained by the neighborhood's homeowners association, HOA. A sizable portion of the homeowners believed fervently in strict adherence to HOA guidelines, from where trash bins could be placed to how many garden gnomes were permissible on a single property. The people who volunteered for the HOA board usually did so for noble reasons. They wanted the community to remain safe, clean, and united. Unfortunately, among the well-meaning volunteers, there existed one figure who took her sense of power and authority to an extreme: Barbara Farnett. Barbara, though her driver's license read one name, had become known throughout the neighborhood by another moniker, Karen. The nickname wasn't entirely fair. Her actual name was Barbara Farnett, after all. Yet her behavior, particularly over the last 2 years, had cemented the label. She was the sort of woman who seemed forever perched on the edge of righteous indignation, always convinced that only she knew what was best. She insisted on greeting neighbors with a critical eye rather than a warm smile. And although she was only in her mid-50s, her brusque manner and perpetual scowl made her seem much older. In meetings, she made it clear that every aspect of the neighborhood, down to which colors were allowable for door paint, should go through her. She liked to stand at the front of the community center hall, arms folded, scanning the assembled crowd for anyone who might dare to question her edicts. The problem was that Barbara, or Karen, didn't just propose rules. She enforced them with an iron fist and little tolerance for any pushback. Not even children were exempt from her hard-nosed approach. Before she reigned over the neighborhood as an HOA board member, Whispering Oaks was described by many families as vibrant and community-oriented. Children often congregated at the main playground after school, where they would play tag or ride their bicycles around the cul-de-sac. Neighbors held block parties where everyone brought a dish, and a big band ensemble, composed of amateur musicians from the cul-de-sac, would play upbeat jazz or rock tunes for hours. As Barbara's influence grew, however, the neighborhood's sense of spontaneity and camaraderie diminished. Strict regulations about noise levels, time limits on outdoor gatherings, and unending disputes over the proper look for lawns made people think twice about hosting events that might draw her ire. Yet Barbara saw herself as a guardian of property values. She believed wholeheartedly that the sharper and more uniform the neighborhood appeared, the more stable the market prices. While she wasn't entirely wrong, she frequently neglected one fundamental truth. Community spirit often matters as much as real estate metrics when it comes to making a place feel like home. On that point, Barbara seemed ignorant, or at least indifferent. For years, the families of Whispering Oaks had been discussing ways to make the main playground more welcoming. Though it already had a sandbox, a slide, and a swing set, parents believed there was potential to create an even more enriching environment for children. Some suggested painting a hopscotch grid on the pavement. Others thought adding a small herb garden might teach kids about plants and gardening. During a neighborhood potluck, the idea of a kids' flower patch took shape. Kayla Porter, an avid gardener and mother of 2 energetic young girls, proposed dedicating a small plot of land adjacent to the playground for children to plant and care for flowers. This concept wasn't unusual in certain neighborhoods. Many communities use small communal gardens to foster a sense of unity and teach children valuable lessons about nature. The initial response to Kayla's proposal was overwhelmingly positive. Over a dozen families volunteered to help with the gardening chores, and some even offered to donate seeds, bulbs, and soil. They envisioned a variety of low-maintenance, pollinator-friendly flowers: zinnias, marigolds, sunflowers, and lavender, among others. The patch wouldn't be large or obtrusive. In fact, it would take up less than 100 square feet near the northern edge of the playground. Because the community collectively owned the playground area, it required HOA approval. One crisp Saturday morning, Kayla and a few other neighbors strolled over to Barbara Farnett's house to present the proposal formally. In theory, it was just a courtesy visit. Most community-centric projects received approval with minimal fuss. Kayla and the others felt confident, given how the rest of the neighborhood seemed to be behind the idea. But as soon as they handed Barbara the typed proposal on pastel-colored stationery, a cloud passed over the older woman's face. She scanned the page, tapping her perfectly polished nails on her granite kitchen countertop. After a tense silence, Barbara turned her steely gaze upon Kayla and said, "A flower patch by the playground? Are you trying to endanger our children?" Confusion swept over Kayla and her friends. Was Barbara referring to potential allergic reactions? Perhaps. Indeed, pollinators like bees would likely appear, drawn by the flowers. But none of the neighbors had anticipated outright refusal. Typically, such small community improvements were embraced. That day, however, marked the beginning of a heated conflict that would escalate beyond anything Whispering Oaks had witnessed before. Barbara's complaint, repeated ad nauseum, was that bees posed a threat to children's safety. She claimed that hosting a flower patch so close to the playground was an irresponsible decision that would inevitably result in stings and subsequent lawsuits. Those who opposed her stance tried to reason that plenty of neighborhoods had community gardens near playgrounds, and children, by and large, learned to respect bees, giving them space. Furthermore, no one forced the kids to play in the flower beds. The patch was merely for educational enjoyment, offering a chance to see flowers grow and learn how to care for them. Yet Barbara wasn't swayed. She insisted that if the flower patch moved forward, she would vote against all future playground enhancements on principle. She threatened to enforce an obscure bylaw that required any gathering spot to maintain at least 50 feet of clearance from potential hazards. She even claimed that local health codes might be violated by the presence of bees in a public recreation area, a statement that no one else could corroborate. But her intimidation tactics were successful in delaying the project. Everyone dreaded a long, bureaucratic battle. However, Kayla and the other parents didn't give up. They believed in their cause wholeheartedly, convinced that children should learn about nature firsthand. Over the next few weeks, they gathered statements of support from pediatricians, local horticulturalists, and even the mayor's office, which had a track record of supporting community gardens. The grassroots campaign to establish the kids' flower patch near the playground gained traction. Even people who had once stayed neutral regarding HOA disputes began siding with Kayla. After all, it seemed deeply unfair that a single board member should hold so much power to veto a harmless educational project. And so, the seeds of conflict had been sown. By mid-spring, the rest of the HOA board felt pressure to appease the growing community demand. They scheduled a formal vote on the kids' flower patch, which passed, narrowly, but decisively. Barbara, incensed, stalked out of the community center after the result was announced. Few realized just how far she would be willing to go in order to reassert her control. The morning the families finally planted their flower patch was filled with excitement. Sunlight poured down through the overhead branches of the stately oak trees that gave the neighborhood its name. Children bounced about, wearing tiny gardening gloves adorned with colorful patterns, digging small holes in the soil with plastic trowels, while parents carefully placed seeds and bulbs. Some older kids, bored with the slower tasks, played tag around the playground, occasionally stopping to peek at their younger siblings' progress. Kayla Porter helped her daughters deposit marigold seeds into shallow furrows, showing them how to pat the soil gently on top. She explained that these bright orange and yellow blossoms would not only bring color to the area, but also help repel certain pests. Meanwhile, Bill and Marcia White, owners of a local nursery, donated seedlings of lavender and sage, which they proudly positioned near the center of the patch. Others contributed zinnias, snapdragons, and a few slender stalks of sunflowers. It was a modest but vibrant variety, more than enough to captivate children's imaginations. Many neighbors took pictures and videos of the event. They marveled at how well the kids were cooperating, each fully invested in the process. For a few precious hours, the atmosphere in Whispering Oaks felt reminiscent of the old days, when community togetherness outweighed petty differences. The tensions with Barbara lingered in the background, of course, but no one wanted to sour the triumphant mood by mentioning her. As midday approached, a scattering of bees did indeed appear. They buzzed lazily around the newly planted flowers, drawn by the promise of future nectar. Several parents quietly reminded their children to keep a respectful distance, and the kids obeyed without fuss. No panicked squeals, no chaos, just a gentle acceptance that bees are part of the natural world. If anything, the children seemed more curious than fearful, fascinated by the shimmering insects. That afternoon, the group celebrated with lemonade and homemade cookies under a tall pine tree. Kayla took a moment to address everyone, saying, "Thank you all for contributing to this beautiful new addition. I can't wait to see the kids' faces when these flowers bloom in full color." Applause, laughter, and friendly chatter filled the air. Despite the subtle apprehension that Barbara might cause trouble, the day ended on a high note. People left the playground feeling optimistic. They had worked together to achieve something meaningful, a small patch of flowers that symbolized shared effort, hope, and learning. Little did they know that a storm was brewing behind the closed curtains of Barbara's home. She watched the planting from across the street, silently fuming. In her mind, the patch represented more than just flowers. It was a direct challenge to her authority. Barbara had lobbied to keep the space empty, fearing potential liability issues, or so she claimed. Now the presence of those bright, innocent blossoms was an affront, an insult to the control she believed she deserved. Within days of the first planting, rumors began circulating that Barbara had been making phone calls to local officials. According to one neighbor who overheard Barbara in a heated exchange on her porch, she was trying to get the county inspector to label the patch a public health hazard. Another neighbor overheard her on the phone with a private attorney, discussing the possibility of issuing cease and desist letters to the volunteer gardeners. None of these threats materialized into actual legal action, at least not initially. But her behind-the-scenes machinations stoked tensions in Whispering Oaks. Everyone suspected that Barbara wouldn't just let the matter drop. The question wasn't if she would retaliate, but how. Despite the looming sense of unease, the children's flower patch continued to flourish. The sunflowers seemed to stretch taller each passing day, while the marigolds and zinnias promised a future collage of oranges, yellows, and pinks. Parents took pride in showing visitors their kids' handiwork. Several families began suggesting expansions, a small sign to label each type of flower, a little stepping stone path for easier access, maybe even an informational board explaining how pollination worked. What started as a small, modest plot was slowly becoming a centerpiece of community pride. Yet Barbara's presence loomed. She continued to prowl the neighborhood during her self-appointed inspections, stopping in front of the playground to glare at the green shoots. Several times, Kayla or another parent saw Barbara scribbling notes on a clipboard while walking around the patch, presumably searching for code violations. If she found any, she didn't immediately share them. Instead, she retreated into her house, letting her anger simmer. At the next HOA meeting, tension crackled in the air like static. Barbara arrived earlier than usual, wearing a crisp navy blue blazer and heels that clicked sharply against the tiled floor of the community center. She took a seat at the head of the long rectangular table, where the board convened, and stared down each attendee with stony silence. Kayla, representing the group responsible for the flower patch, sat off to the side with a stack of progress reports and pictures of the thriving plants. Other community members filled the rows of folding chairs, anxiously awaiting the proceedings. When it came time to discuss community updates, Kayla proudly presented a short slideshow. Images of kids carefully watering the patch, admiring the first tiny blossoms, and reading about pollinators from colorful posters that parents had improvised. The crowd applauded, but Barbara merely pursed her lips. She waited until Kayla concluded, then leaned forward and spoke in an icy tone. "I have reason to believe," she began, "that an inordinate amount of bees have been drawn to this new installation. Multiple families have expressed concern." Kayla's brow furrowed. She glanced around, but saw mostly confusion or skeptical frowns. "Which families are complaining?" Kayla asked gently. "I've only received positive feedback, except from you, Barbara." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "That's not relevant. I have statements, though I'm not obligated to share them with you. The bottom line is that this patch may be creating a serious liability issue for the HOA. If a child is stung, or if anyone with allergies has a reaction, we're all on the hook." Others on the board seemed ambivalent, shifting in their chairs. They didn't want to escalate a conflict, Yet they also didn't want to dismiss potential liability. Eventually, one of the more neutral board members requested an inspection by a local gardener with knowledge about pollination. Kayla agreed enthusiastically. Barbara shrugged but didn't object. The meeting adjourned with no immediate resolution, leaving everyone uncertain about the future. Outside, after the meeting, Kayla overheard Barbara muttering to someone, "I don't care who they bring in to check those flowers. I'll find a way to prove it's a hazard." The words sent a chill through Kayla. She knew Barbara wouldn't rest until she dismantled the patch. However, Kayla never could have predicted the lengths Barbara would go to, or how destructive her plan would be once set in motion. One summer morning, just a few weeks after the heated HOA meeting, something unimaginable happened. It was a Saturday, around 9 o'clock. The air was already growing warm, hinting at a scorching afternoon ahead. Families trickled out of their houses, some planning to tend to the flowers, others heading to the playground with their kids for a bit of early fun before the heat became oppressive. Nobody expected to see an unfamiliar bulldozer parked near the curb, rumbling and spewing exhaust. At first, the few neighbors who spotted it wondered if there was some scheduled road maintenance or pipeline work. But as they watched, their confusion turned to horror. Because behind the wheel, wearing tinted sunglasses and an expression of grim determination, sat none other than Barbara Farnett. She seemed to be maneuvering the heavy machinery with single-minded focus, edging closer and closer to the flower patch. Children on the playground froze in place, watching the monstrous vehicle roll forward. Parents yelled out warnings, disbelieving what they were seeing. Kayla, who lived only a short walk away, heard the commotion and rushed outside, her heart pounding. When she arrived, she saw the bulldozer's steel blade lowered, aimed at the delicate array of blossoms. A group of wide-eyed kids stood to the side, uncertain whether to run away or scream for help. "Barbara, what are you doing?" Kayla shouted, running toward the bulldozer. She tried to wave her arms to catch Barbara's attention or get her to stop. Instead, Barbara either ignored Kayla or genuinely didn't see her in the confusion. With a roar of the engine, the bulldozer lurched forward, its blade tearing into the soft earth and flattening the first row of sunflowers. The tall stems snapped beneath the machine's relentless force, their bright yellow heads crushed into the dirt. Pandemonium broke out. Children started crying. Parents began yelling at Barbara to stop. The mechanical behemoth moved methodically across the length of the flower patch, churning soil and crushing plants in its wake. Honeybees that had been busy collecting pollen erupted into the air in a panic, swirling around the destruction. Some watchers ran forward in a vain attempt to pull up the unflattened flowers before they too were destroyed, but it was too late. Within minutes, the entire patch was reduced to churned mud and shredded vegetation. Finally, Barbara switched off the bulldozer's engine. She climbed down, her face flushed and her hair disheveled from the heat and vibration. At least 24 furious neighbors surrounded her, demanding an explanation. Tears streamed down the cheeks of children who had spent hours planting and caring for what was now a ruined mess. One brave parent stepped forward and demanded, "Barbara, have you lost your mind? This was a community project. Our kids made that garden. How dare you?" Barbara's voice trembled with equal parts anger and self-righteousness. "I couldn't stand by while a dangerous bee infestation threatened the safety of our neighborhood's children. As an HOA board member, I have a duty. No one else was willing to do what had to be done, so I took matters into my own hands." Stunned silence met her statement. All around them, wrecked sunflowers lay in the mud, a testament to her destructive decision. Some began to phone the police, or at least the local HOA president, to report what had happened. Kayla picked up one of the crushed blooms, tears in her eyes, and asked, "Why couldn't you at least talk to us first? We could have found some compromise. This wasn't your right." Barbara scowled. "If I had waited for consensus, we'd be dealing with bee stings and lawsuits. We can't let that happen. And I have every right. My father-in-law owns this bulldozer rental shop, and as an HOA official, I had reason to remove a hazard. All of you can protest as much as you want, but it's done." She turned her back, marching away, her shoulders stiff with defiance. The scene she left behind was one of heartbreak. Parents tried to console their children, many of whom were sobbing, asking why someone would ruin their special garden. Others rushed to take photos of the damage, planning to file formal complaints and possibly lawsuits. But at that moment, The only palpable emotion was shock. Shock that someone living among them, someone with whom they shared block parties and holiday festivities, albeit less frequently since Barbara took charge, could stoop to such a cruel, destructive act. News of the bulldozing spread like wildfire. By midday, practically every resident of Whispering Oaks knew that Barbara had demolished the kids' flower patch. The online neighborhood forum exploded with posts condemning her actions. Neighbors who had previously defended some of her stricter guidelines on yard maintenance now openly criticized her for crossing a line. People even began to question whether she was fit to remain on the HOA board. In the days that followed, Kayla and other parents met to decide how to respond. They understood that the emotional scars ran deeper than the loss of a few plants. Children now associated the playground, their safe haven, with the memory of a roaring bulldozer and the site where their beloved flowers were torn apart. Something had to be done, not just to avenge the destroyed patch, but to restore the community's sense of optimism and cooperation. They considered legal routes, pressing charges for destruction of property, or forcing the HOA to remove Barbara from her position. Yet many recognized this might end up entangled in months, if not years, of paperwork, depositions, and court battles. Not to mention, they weren't even sure if the destroyed flower patch had enough monetary value to inspire a strong legal case. Emotional distress was real, but proving it in court could be complicated. Meanwhile, Barbara acted as if she had saved the neighborhood from an apocalyptic swarm of bees. She told anyone who would listen that she had performed a public service. When local reporters from a small-town newspaper tried to interview her, she insisted that the real story was how she had protected children from potential allergic reactions. Her spin on the incident only fueled further outrage among residents who knew the truth. At the next HOA meeting, which was far more crowded than usual, tension reached a boiling point. People lined the walls of the community center, with some even standing in the hallway, straining to hear. As soon as the meeting opened for public comment, Kayla stepped to the microphone, her voice resolute despite her grief and anger. "Barbara Farnett," she said, her eyes locked on the unrepentant woman at the table's end, "you have traumatized our children. You have destroyed a community project that brought people together. And you did it unilaterally, without a proper vote, without an official order from the board. I and many others here demand accountability." Cheers and applause erupted, echoing in the hall. Barbara, unruffled, lifted her chin and replied coldly, "I refuse to apologize for preventing a serious safety hazard. Everyone who is upset needs to look at the bigger picture. No children will be stung if there are no flowers attracting bees." A flurry of hands shot up in the audience, each waiting to speak. Parents recounted how their children had nightmares about bulldozers now, how the project had been a cherished educational tool, how bees are a natural part of the environment and not an evil scourge. Even a local horticulturist took the microphone to explain that eliminating a flower patch wouldn't eliminate bees, that pollinators would still exist in the area, drawn by countless other blossoms. Barbara rolled her eyes at these explanations, refusing to engage with facts that contradicted her narrative. Although many in the crowd demanded her immediate removal from the board, official bylaw procedures required a formal recall petition, followed by a vote. This would take time. Barbara smirked as she informed the crowd that she had no intention of stepping down, implying they would have to go through the official, tedious process if they wanted her gone. The meeting ended in frustration. Once again, Barbara walked out, head held high, but pursued by shouts of angry parents. Determined not to let Barbara's actions stifle their creativity and community spirit, the residents decided to do something bold. When one parent half-jokingly suggested building a greenhouse next to the playground, thus making the flower patch both protected from bulldozers and shielded from bee infiltration, the idea quickly gained traction. Why stop at a simple patch that could be so easily destroyed? If Barbara wanted to annihilate a few rows of flowers, they would respond by raising an entire greenhouse that would house not just flowers, but an educational center for children. It would be bigger, more permanent, and ironically safer for those worried about direct bee exposure, because it could be enclosed in a controlled environment. Kayla and other parents formed a planning committee. They began researching the costs of building a modest greenhouse structure. One older gentleman, Mr. Patterson, had previously constructed greenhouses for local schools as part of a volunteer project. He offered his expertise in design and materials. Meanwhile, other neighbors organized fundraising efforts. The idea caught fire. People chipped in whatever they could. Some gave significant donations, others contributed labor or donated building supplies. Even some local businesses got wind of the plan and offered sponsorships. A hardware store on the edge of town provided a discount on lumber and plexiglass. A gardening supply company donated seeds and irrigation components. A local nonprofit that taught children about sustainable farming pledged a small grant. The total cost began to seem manageable. The greenhouse, if all went well, would boast built-in benches, raised planter boxes, and an irrigation system that children could help operate. It would also open into the main playground area, allowing easy access for anyone who wanted to explore or learn. When rumors reached Barbara that the neighborhood was plotting to erect an even larger botanical presence near the playground, her outrage was palpable. She stormed into the next HOA board meeting demanding an immediate block on the greenhouse project. This time, however, she didn't have the element of surprise on her side. She attempted to cite the same bylaw regarding the 50-foot clearance from hazards, but the community was prepared. They pointed out that since the greenhouse was an enclosed structure, the hazard of open-air pollinators was mitigated. They also argued that the greenhouse would be locked during off hours, eliminating any liability for nighttime visitors. Furthermore, the group pushing the project had meticulously followed the protocol for new development, submitting architectural plans for review well in advance. Finally, the greenhouse would incorporate an educational initiative recognized by the state, aligning with official guidelines for child development programs. HOA bylaw after bylaw was methodically countered. Other board members, likely eager to distance themselves from Barbara's extremism, began voicing tepid support for the greenhouse, citing both community interest and the positive media buzz it was attracting. One board member even joked that the greenhouse might become a selling point for families looking to move to Whispering Oaks, boosting property values in the long run. Barbara was livid, but her typical tactics were failing to sway the board. With a forced vote, the greenhouse project was approved. The motion carried by a significant margin, leaving Barbara stunned and furious. The meeting ended with a triumphant mood among residents. Many lingered outside, chatting excitedly about the next steps for construction. Barbara stomped away, refusing to speak to anyone, her expression dark. Kayla watched her disappear into the night, a swirl of conflicting emotions in her chest, relief that the greenhouse had been approved, and dread at what Barbara might do next. Construction of the greenhouse began with an outpouring of community effort rarely seen in Whispering Oaks. The battered playground, once overshadowed by the memory of the bulldozer, teemed with new hope as volunteers arrived day after day. Some brought power tools, others delivered refreshments. Children watched from a safe distance, asking endless questions about how the greenhouse would work, eager to help in small ways, holding nails, passing screws, or painting signs. Mr. Patterson oversaw the structural build. He had drawn up blueprints for a 20 by 30-foot greenhouse, large enough to accommodate a small class of children at once. The foundation had to be carefully leveled to ensure water drainage wouldn't become an issue. Then came the framing, a robust wooden skeleton anchored in concrete footers. The walls would be covered in durable clear panels that let in sunlight but kept out the elements. As the weeks passed, the frame of the greenhouse rose steadily. Kayla and some of the other parents took charge of planning the interior layout. They decided on 3 long rows of raised beds, each labeled with sections for different types of plants. One row would be dedicated to vegetables and herbs, spinach, basil, tomatoes, and peppers, demonstrating how food grows. Another row would host pollinator-friendly flowers that kids could study up close. And the third row would feature an array of succulents, cacti, and other interesting varieties to spark scientific curiosity. In the meantime, Barbara's hostility festered. She tried lodging formal complaints about the construction noise or the volunteer hours. She claimed that the greenhouse, despite being approved, was an eyesore. She wrote lengthy emails to the entire board, demanding random inspections. But her efforts only succeeded in alienating her further. The more she railed against the greenhouse, the more determined the community became to see it through. During construction, there were a few suspicious incidents, like a broken sprinkler head, a mysteriously cut extension cord, or a small pile of nails dumped near the building site. Although no one had proof that Barbara was behind these minor acts of sabotage, many suspected she was quietly trying to hinder progress. However, the spirit of solidarity among residents only grew stronger with each setback. People replaced broken equipment, donated new cords, and pressed on. Children especially enjoyed watching the greenhouse take shape. They marveled at the translucent walls going up, the sturdy wooden doors, and the vents near the roof that would open automatically when the internal temperature got too high. Their initial heartbreak from losing the flower patch slowly gave way to excitement. Seeing the greenhouse near completion, they spoke animatedly about planting seeds, watering them, and maybe even hosting a small science fair there one day. By the end of the summer, the greenhouse stood proud and bright, connected to the playground by a short wooden walkway. Above the entrance hung a handcrafted sign that read, "Whispering Oaks Community Greenhouse, Growing Together." A sense of triumph washed over the neighborhood. The structure was more than just a replacement for a flower patch. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to how a united community could overcome even the most stubborn adversary. The date of the greenhouse's grand opening was set for a sunny Saturday in early autumn. Invitations went out digitally and by word of mouth. Parents planned games, a potluck, and a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Kayla and other volunteers arrived early to decorate, hanging festive flags around the playground and lining the greenhouse pathway with potted chrysanthemums. A local teacher volunteered to coordinate a children's harvest demonstration, letting kids pick a few early vegetables from the greenhouse to show what they had grown. Some children practiced reciting fun facts about bees, pollination, and plant growth. Even the local news station promised to send a small crew to cover the event, especially because the dramatic bulldozer story had previously garnered attention. They wanted to highlight how the community had bounced back in such a creative, constructive way. As families arrived, they marveled at the greenhouse's interior, which was now bursting with rows of greenery. Tomato plants climbed up trellises, basil leaves exuded a fresh aroma, and bright clusters of zinnias and marigolds added cheerful splashes of color. Children ran in and out, proudly pointing to the spots they had helped plant. Parents snapped photos on their phones, capturing the kids' excited faces. Eventually, the crowd gathered at the entrance for a short dedication speech. Kayla stood next to the greenhouse door, beaming. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "What we see behind us is the result of countless volunteer hours and generous donations. This greenhouse is for our children, for our community, and for future generations of Whispering Oaks. It's a place where we can learn about nature, sustainability, and collaboration. Thank you for believing in this vision." Applause echoed. A large red ribbon was stretched across the entryway, and two children, one from the earliest group that had planted the now-destroyed flower patch, held a pair of oversized scissors. With a collective countdown, they snipped the ribbon, and the greenhouse was officially open. As people funneled inside to explore, the local news crew set up a camera, capturing the bright smiles, the greenery, and the overall celebratory atmosphere. Many commented on the irony that the impetus for such a fantastic new space was the destruction of a smaller, simpler patch of flowers. The old patch might have been the spark, but the new greenhouse was a bonfire of community spirit. One figure conspicuously absent from all the festivities was Barbara Farnett. She had not RSVP'd, had not appeared at any stage of the construction, and certainly had not volunteered her time or resources. Most assumed she was sulking in her house or finding some new angle to complain about. But as the event drew to a close and the sun dipped low, Barbara made an unexpected appearance at the far edge of the crowd. Standing near the playground fence, arms crossed, she watched the children dart in and out of the greenhouse. Her expression seemed conflicted, part anger, part something else. Perhaps even she felt a pang of regret. Or maybe she was just furious that the project she'd tried to thwart had succeeded so gloriously. Whatever the cause, she refused to interact with anyone. When Kayla noticed her, Barbara turned abruptly and left, disappearing around the corner of the playground without a word. In the weeks following the greenhouse's completion, Whispering Oaks relished a season of relative harmony. Children visited the greenhouse daily, watering the plants and marveling at their growth. The new structure doubled as a gathering spot for neighbors to chat, share gardening tips, and plan future improvements. In many ways, The greenhouse had become the beating heart of the neighborhood, a place full of life and optimism. However, the tension with Barbara was far from over. True to her combative nature, she refused to acknowledge the greenhouse's success. Instead, she devoted her energy to drumming up new complaints. She circulated a petition asserting that the structure obstructed the historic sight lines of the playground, thus devaluing neighboring properties. She claimed the greenhouse's reflective surfaces could disorient passing drivers, though no traffic incidents had been reported. She even tried to argue that the nighttime glow from the greenhouse's small LED grow lights caused light pollution. None of these accusations gained traction. The board members who once hesitated to oppose Barbara now saw her for the saboteur she was. They had become more aligned with the community, especially as positive feedback about the greenhouse poured in. Children were learning about plants hands-on, parents were forging stronger bonds, and local media coverage further enhanced the neighborhood's reputation. Meanwhile, the recall petition against Barbara slowly advanced. At first, many believed removing her from the HOA board might be too extreme. But after the bulldozer incident, the scales tipped. Parents whose children had been traumatized by that morning's spectacle became the recall's most ardent supporters. Over time, they gathered enough signatures to bring the matter to a formal vote. Barbara, of course, contested the recall. She insisted she'd done nothing illegal, merely decisive. She claimed to be a victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by people who value flowers over children's safety. But her credibility had eroded significantly. Even those who once admired her strict approach to neighborhood standards now saw that her thirst for control trumped any real sense of communal well-being. The recall vote was scheduled for late fall. It promised to be a defining moment for Whispering Oaks. Would they continue allowing Barbara to dominate, or would they reclaim their HOA board for the good of the neighborhood? Tension seeped through every block, every conversation. People tried to remain polite. This was, after all, a suburban development with carefully tended lawns, but the conflict was undeniable. Despite the uncertainty, the greenhouse thrived. Parents organized a Halloween event inside it, decorating the greenhouse with jack-o'-lanterns and hosting a pumpkin carving station for the kids. Nearby stood the playground, no longer overshadowed by that disastrous day of bulldozing. And while the memory of the destroyed flower patch still stung, it had also given rise to something bigger and more lasting. In that sense, Barbara's rampage had inadvertently sown the seeds of a brighter, more cooperative community. The day of the recall vote arrived with a crisp chill in the air. The community center was abuzz from early morning as residents came to cast their ballots. Barbara was there, flanked by a handful of supporters, those who either genuinely believed in her perspective or held some personal loyalty to her. Across the room stood Kayla and the parents who had championed the greenhouse project. They greeted voters with friendly smiles, calmly explaining the rationale for replacing Barbara on the board. Over the following hours, residents filed in and out, marking their choices and dropping slips into sealed boxes. By late afternoon, volunteers opened the boxes to count ballots in full view, ensuring transparency. A hush fell over the room as the final tally neared. Barbara sat stiffly on a metal folding chair, her hands folded in her lap, lips pressed thin. When the head volunteer finished counting, she cleared her throat and read the results. The motion to recall Barbara had passed by a wide margin. Whispering Oaks residents had decisively voted to remove her from the HOA board. A murmur of relief and applause spread through the crowd, followed by a few quiet sighs. Some people pitied Barbara, while others felt vindicated. Barbara rose to her feet, her eyes blazing. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "Mark my words, you'll regret this. When you're overrun with lawsuits and stinging insects, you'll wish I was still here to protect you." Then, without waiting for anyone to respond, she stormed out of the community center, letting the heavy door slam behind her. Kayla felt a flood of conflicting emotions, relief that the recall had succeeded, sorrow for the ugliness that had permeated the neighborhood. She turned to the other families and offered them a grateful smile. "Thank you all for standing together," she said, voice trembling with emotion. "We couldn't have done any of this without unity." In the coming days, an interim member was appointed to fill Barbara's vacant seat on the board until the next election. This new appointee was a longtime resident who promised more balanced decision-making. The tension that had hung over Whispering Oaks like a storm cloud for months began to dissipate. People no longer felt they needed to tiptoe around the playground, worried about a sudden outburst from their most overzealous neighbor. For the first time in a long while, the air felt lighter. Barbara, for her part, retreated from public life in the neighborhood. She locked herself away behind drawn curtains, rarely greeting passers-by. Rumor had it that she was considering selling her house and moving elsewhere. Others insisted she would remain in Whispering Oaks out of sheer stubbornness. Whether or not she stayed, the community at large felt they had reclaimed a measure of sanity and positivity. Months passed. The greenhouse continued to blossom, thriving through autumn and into winter, thanks to the climate-controlled interior. Children visited weekly, marveling as tomatoes ripened even when frost coated the grass outside. They learned about composting, seed saving, and natural pest control. The greenhouse had become more than just a structure. It was a hub of community learning and engagement. A small plaque was installed inside, reading, "In memory of the flower patch, destroyed by one, yet reborn by many. May our community forever grow together." It served as both a reminder of the past conflict and a beacon of inspiration for future projects. Every time a child asked about the plaque, parents explained how the greenhouse came to be, how unity overcame pettiness, and how the bright spirit of collaboration prevailed. Kayla and other leading members of the greenhouse committee often joked that Barbara had unwittingly done them a favor. If not for her bulldozer rampage, the community might have remained satisfied with a modest patch of flowers. Now, they had something exponentially better, a place that was safe from the elements, educational, and protected from destructive impulses. Occasionally, the memory of that morning's chaos returned. Children cowering, the loud rumble of the bulldozer's engine, the sight of flowers crushed under metal treads. Some parents worried that the kids might never fully shake that trauma. But time and a renewed sense of communal purpose acted as healing forces. The children saw how, from tragedy, could come triumph and creativity. They learned that neighbors, when united, could stand against wrongdoing. As for Barbara, she remained a recluse. Her yard, once pristine, grew a bit wild around the edges, as though she no longer cared for external appearances. Some neighbors interpreted this as a sign of her declining influence, while others felt a twinge of sympathy. For all her flaws, Barbara had once seemed genuinely concerned about property values and neighborhood aesthetics, if perhaps too concerned. Now, she seemed to have lost interest entirely. Life in Whispering Oaks carried on. Block parties resumed. The greenhouse hosted weekend workshops, and the playground was once again filled with laughter. The fear that once accompanied the presence of the HOA Karen faded, replaced by a sense that the community had emerged stronger and more unified after weathering one of its darkest episodes. And so, the final twist of fate was that Barbara, in seeking to stamp out a simple children's flower patch, instead sparked the creation of something far grander. A permanent greenhouse that welcomed countless blooms year-round, offering an endless array of scents, colors, and lessons. In her attempt to eradicate the bees and the flowers, she had inadvertently ensured that the neighborhood's interest in gardening and in communal spirit would only flourish more powerfully than before. Even to this day, Whispering Oaks remains a testament to how adversity can galvanize a neighborhood. Visitors who stop by are often enchanted by the greenhouse, never suspecting the dramatic origins that led to its construction. If they ask, longtime residents will share the story of how a single bulldozer ride, executed by a self-righteous HOA member, unleashed an unstoppable wave of community solidarity. Inside the greenhouse, rows of cheerful zinnias and marigolds bloom in vibrant defiance, a living reminder that sometimes destruction sows the seeds of greater resilience. Children, once horrified by the memory of the crushed flower patch, now run toward the greenhouse with eager curiosity. They learn about pollinators from behind secure walls, give them wide berth if they see a stray bee, and discover that plants, like communities, can flourish in the face of adversity, provided they have the right care and collective will. And so, while Barbara Karen Farnett's name is rarely spoken these days, her legacy lingers. She set out to eliminate what she perceived as a threat, but she inadvertently nurtured an even stronger force for good. The unstoppable growth of the greenhouse stands in silent tribute to the idea that when people unite around a shared vision, not even the wrath of a self-appointed tyrant on a bulldozer can flatten their dreams. It remains a glowing, flower-filled sanctuary, a gentle but unmistakable rebuke to anyone who believes intimidation and destruction can triumph over hope, community, and life in full bloom.